We will be ready to welcome Poetry Connections with Sampurna Chattarji, Nicky Arscott, Subhro Bandopadhyay, Eurig Salisbury, on how poetry links us with Alexandra Büchler, who's an old friend of Kalam, and we are delighted to welcome her back.
Poetry Connections India Wales. I'm Alexandra Büchler. I'm the director of Literature Across Frontiers, which is the organization that brings you this session and the outcomes of this of the project that bears this name. We have 4 poets here. We are going to be talking about poetry and also about exploring other places, other locations, and exploring certain concepts. We're going to talk about translation and about multilingualism and I suppose about other things as well, and we're going to read some poetry. I will start by introducing the poets briefly, and I'll talk very, very briefly about the project, Poetry Connections, and then we'll get started, and in the end we will open the session up to questions from the audience. So from my far left, we have Eurig Salisbury. Eurig is a Welsh language poet from Aberystwyth. He teaches creative writing at the University of Aberystwyth, and he has published 2 collections of poetry, one being a collection of poetry for children. He was the Children's Laureate for Wales, and he also published a novel last year, is that right? He is a much awarded writer. In Wales, there is a celebration, I suppose, of Welsh culture called Eisteddfod. It's an annual festival, and writers and poets are actually crowned and chaired at the festival. They actually sit on something like this, and so Eurig received several awards of this kind from the Welsh-speaking community. It's actually quite a spectacular festival, and if you ever go to Wales in August, don't miss it. It's really something to behold. It also has, apart from writing, it has all other kinds of arts, music and performance, etc. Sampurna Chattarji, or Sampurna, as we should call her here in Kolkata, probably doesn't need an introduction. She is a well-known writer, prose writer, poet, translator, and editor. She has written poetry, prose. She's published short stories. She has translated several books, and her most recent, she has 14 books to her name, so I won't list them all, but her latest poetry book is called Space Gulliver, Chronicles of an Alien, and it was published by HarperCollins India in 2016, is that right? She also famously translated the well-known poet Joy Goswami, and from Bangla into English. She also has published other translations, and she translates both ways, into Bangla and from Bangla, which is not always what translators do. She has been working with us, with our projects for quite a long time. We started working in India about 8 or 9 years ago. It will be almost a decade. And what we try to do with our projects is we bring together writers to work together, to collaborate, to co-write, to translate each other, and to explore each other's environment in which they work, in which they create. On my right, we have somebody who is local but doesn't live here anymore, and he just told me that he would like to return and eventually will. Subhro Bandopadhyay is a Bangla poet. He writes in Bengali. He also translates, and he teaches Spanish at the Cervantes Institute in Delhi. He has 4 books of poetry, and he received the National Prize for Emerging or Young Poets from the Sahitya Academy in 2013, is that right? And he received several other awards also from Spain. He has written in Bengali the biography of Pablo Neruda, and his poetry has been translated into Spanish. He has 2 books in Spanish, and he has also appeared in festivals in Spanish-speaking countries. Nicky Arscott lives near Aberystwyth. She lives in a small place where actually Subhro visited her during this project. She is a poet, I should say an emerging poet, a young poet, also an artist. She makes drawings and she makes poetry comics. She started a small press called Mother Mary Press, which publishes poetry comics, and she will be actually doing a workshop here and also in Jaipur at the Jaipur Literature Festival. This is really, she has a pamphlet, but this is really her first book with Subhro, and I think it marks a really important bond that they formed through this project. Very briefly, the project Poetry Connections Wales brought together 10 poets, 5 from Wales, 5 from India, and they didn't really swap places. They visited each other. So Subhro came to Aberystwyth and spent time with Nicky, and so did Sampurna. Sampurna visited Aberystwyth many times before, and she has actually worked with Eurig for a long time. So the book that came out of their collaboration really is quite substantial. It marks a kind of creative relationship of 8 years? 7 years. And it's one of the 5 books that have come out of this project. The other poets involved in this project are now touring elsewhere, so we are very proud of this. Yeah. And these books are published. Thank you. These books are published by Poetrywala, the Mumbai-based publisher, and you can order them. Unfortunately, we don't have copies here available. You can pre-order them. They are literally being printed now. During this project, you were given, and I should say that probably these days poets meet in projects, they don't meet in salons. And so you were given a brief. You were also given quite a lot of leeway in what you would be doing. You visited each other, and although Sampurna doesn't live in Kolkata anymore, actually Eurig visited her here. So Kolkata is something that connects these 4 poets in some way. As I said, Sampurna spent time in Aberystwyth. So you were asked to explore several concepts. One of them was independence, the concept of independence. And why is that? The project is supported by Wales Arts International and the British Council Wales, and it was one of a series of projects between the UK and India to celebrate and mark the anniversary of India's independence. So we thought that the poets would be asked to look at the concept of independence. What does it mean to them? What does it mean creatively, personally, and politically, of course? So what does independence mean to you? What did you as a pair come up with examining this concept?
Okay. Well, in a pretty obvious way, I suppose, independence for me, what stood out immediately was the fact that India is obviously an independent nation and Wales is not. So there was an obvious contrast there. Some of us in Wales see Wales as the very first colony, conquered by England back in 1282. So we were the first, and we will probably be the last as well. So there's plenty to learn, I suppose. But one of the things we discuss in one of the poems is, well, a conversation that I remember having with Sampurna on my first visit to India back in 2011 in Kerala, was this idea of owning parts of what the empire brought to India, and then saying, in no uncertain terms, goodbye. And those things were the language, the English language. Okay, we'll keep that, and cricket, and the judiciary as well. So that was a very interesting conversation for me, and it kind of gave me an idea in Wales, a way forward maybe in Wales. This idea of, because the relationship between Welsh and English in Wales is a very, very troubled one, because of obviously Welsh is a minority language in its own country, and English is obviously such a powerful language. But one of the ways forward, I think, is for Wales to own the English language and make it one of Wales's languages along with Welsh. I think we would be far more at home if we managed to do that, and I got that idea from you.
So you'll find some of these ideas expressed as poetry in the book. Some of you may have attended our reading in November, where we did something. We realized, of course, now we are quarreling about whether it's a Welsh concept or a Bengali concept. The concept was the Ambrason, which is a debate between poets. Of course, that's the Kobil Lodai. And one of the things we talk about in that is this question of language, because for me, independence, of course, we take it for granted. And the one point of contention that I have had in the past with Welsh poets who then went on to become very good friends of mine is, how can you continue to write in the language of the oppressor? And it wasn't until one had decoded what we were doing, and as I say in the poem, in the Kobil Lodai, we khichuried, we barandad, it's like we took it. These are our words, then went back into the Oxford English Dictionary. So for me, this inhabiting the English language is the freest thing I've ever done, because also because of the legacy of my forebears. So as a poet and a prose writer writing in English, if I had been born post-independence, I would have had to struggle with this notion a lot more. But people of that first generation of poets, for example, Adil Jasawala, Nissim Ezekiel, Dom Morris, they wrote in English, they fought a lot of our battles, and they laid the way for us so that our generation doesn't have to keep answering questions about why are you writing in this other language and not in the mother language. But I think being with Eurig has also made me more alert to the insidious ways in which parts of the mind may stay colonized, and to be more alert to the ways in which we slip into modes of being that are non-interrogative. So what the Welsh presence has given me is this awareness that this history that we are sitting implicated within, must consciously be questioned. And I think some of that I've done in the poems in the book.
Subhro, Nicky, what did you discover in your examinations of the concept of independence and colonialism? Of course, all these questions, I'm always reminded of the kind of notion of concentric circles in terms of identity. You can be Welsh, you can be British, you can be Bengali, you can be Indian, and you can be something else as well. So, how did you? What discoveries did you make when you worked together and you visited each other? And what did you come up with in terms of identifying the?
Well, I think luckily for both of us, we were on the same page when we met. I think in a lot of different ways we're quite politically similar, and we share a lot of the same interests. And it was very good to be able to talk very freely with you about a lot of the things that I guess I was slightly nervous about discussing, such as colonialism and the legacy of the British Empire, you know, which feels very suitable to be sitting here today. And for me, the ideas of colonialism and independence really got me thinking about how I'd never really examined my past and my ancestry, and where I would describe myself as English, although I do live in Wales, where I come from and how I've got to where I am today, and at whose expense, you know, not just as an individual, but as a collective within my society. Like, how has my society got where it is today? And that's something, there's a concept that really runs through, I think, both of our sequences of poetry, and is also recognized in the title, which is Aerial Roots, so the idea of examining our past. One of the images that I was very interested in was the idea of the circle, as you mentioned, and this idea of having a center. The idea of empire having a center, which I guess at one point would have been Britain, and then I guess the idea of independence being about recentering, you know, undoing this idea of a bullseye in the middle of a circle and rediscovering and recentering the circle, or breaking the circle, whatever. So that's an image that crops up a lot in my poems. One of them is the idea of a whalebone skirt and being in the center of a skirt. And I think the other one is, yeah, as I said, this idea of Britain being in the center of things, myself being in the center of things, and trying to think about how to change that and move forward and progress.
For me, well, independence is a factor that came to me when we started working. Before going to Wales, we started talking about the things that we're going to do, pre-plan something, and we probably decided consciously to avoid landscaping. And then in Wales, of course, I discovered certain parts of some lesser known facts of the history that I'm always fascinated with. First, wellies. A funny discovery that all of us here in West Bengal, we call it gumboots. And I discovered in Wales they're called wellies. And wellies come from Duke of Wellington. He designed the boot for him. And we have a Wellington Square here, named after him. From that weird connection, I went back to my Spanish connections, because the same Duke of Wellington, before becoming Duke of Wellington, he was posted to Calcutta. He was sick and tired of the city. He decided to move back to England. He went back, and then he was posted to Spain to fight with Napoleon. And again, he fought another war of independence against the French on behalf of the Spaniards. So in the book, there is a series of 4 poems. It's a kind of 5 poems. It's called, in Bangla, it's called Shadhinota Shomuho, a multitude of freedoms that Sampurna translated. And so there you can find different layers of of freedom or independence that I thought about.
I suppose when we look at poetry and translation, there are many constraints we have to deal with, but also we can take certain liberties. These books, what's so wonderful about them is that they are in 6 languages. The languages we have in these books are, of course, English, Welsh, Khasi, we have Bengali, Kannada, and Malayalam. Now, your book is, it is bilingual, but you have been working with translation, and how was that for you? I mean, how did you, because this wasn't the first time you have been working on translations of Welsh poetry through English?
Yeah, I think when we first met, the mandate was entirely to translate each other. So the possibility of creating new work, whatever language we might eventually write it in, wasn't even then a glimmer on the horizon. But what happened is, and we've put 3 of those translations in this book because we felt that we needed to mark the beginning as much as the culmination. So this project that we are currently all part of is, in a sense, for us a culmination, but the beginning, the very root of it was translation, where I was trying to find a way into Eurig's language without being able to read it, because though it's written in Roman script, it was absolutely opaque to me because of the nature of the script. And I realized only when I asked him to say the words out loud and wrote them either in Bangla or in Hindi, that means in the Devanagari script, that I could get my tongue around those words. That's where it actually began, the entering of an alien sound, which remained opaque to me through the way it looked until it was unlocked through my own script. So in that way, and when I say own script, that's really a strange formulation coming from me because I write in English. But somehow Bangla as a script has enabled me to enter zones of understanding of my own literary heritage, whether it's when I'm translating Shukumar Rai or Joy Goswami, but also translating Eurig's Welsh poem like Kinhanet Lesson into Bangla or Aberystwyth into Bangla. It was the strangest, it felt like a peculiar kind of kinship. And I don't think that would have happened if we had just started writing poems together. You know, it was more the translation that made it possible to find this great affinity, which was strange because we don't write anything like each other. So it was
maybe we should have a little footnote here. What is, can you briefly explain what Kinhanet is? A form you learned at 13?
Yes, so Kinhanet, the name itself means harmony, and it is something that was developed over a period of centuries in the Welsh language, in Welsh culture, a mode of writing poetry that sounds harmonious. That's why it's called Kinhanet. So it's supposed to sound beautiful when it's proclaimed or performed. And as I mentioned, it happened gradually over a period of centuries. Nobody actually sat down and said, this is Kinhanet, or got a group of people together and said, well, we are going to devise a system called Kinhanet. It actually happened naturally in the language. And by the Middle Ages, about the 15th century, for example, by the 15th century, it had reached a point of maturity that has stayed more or less the same. It has changed a bit, but not much to this day. So I am a practitioner of Kinhanet, so I use Kinhanet almost every time I write a poem, and sometimes even in English. There are bits of Kinhanet in my English poetry as well. So Kinhanet basically is you have different rules governing what you can do in a single line of poetry. So it's based on internal rhyme and consonants to varying degrees of complexity.
Subhro and Nicky, how did you deal with crossing the boundaries of language and script and I suppose constraints of form and so on. How did that work in your collaboration?
We were quite lucky because we had 2 extra languages under our belts, didn't we? We had Spanish between us, which was a fun thing to discover we had in common, and added an extra spin to it. And we also had what I like to think of as another form of translation was the drawings, the visualization that I make of, here we go, of poetry, the poetry comics. And so what I did with the translated versions of your poem was visualize them and create these drawings that they weren't just illustrations, they were interpretations which were then visualized, which I like to think of as an extra step away from the drawing. So not just a direct literal illustration, but something beyond that, which I could then show to you, and you could see what was going on in my head. All the weird things going on in there when I read your poems. So,
well, for me, again, Roman script is something that surrounds us everywhere nowadays. We don't see any more Indian language script throughout the country. Everywhere you go, if you go to a big city in India, everywhere the Roman script is there. So script-wise, that was not challenging, but content-wise, translation was challenging because Nicky's poetry is essentially conceptual. So it took me a little to deal with the language that she plays with, and which for me still is a foreign language. And dealing with a foreign language and translating poetry from a foreign language, it's always a difficult task. And well, I try to deal with the context first that we talked about and the visualization. Then I went for my translation. Sometimes I changed different drafts on the basis of her illustrations as well.
I think at this point we could have some poetry, and you...
So what we'll do is we thought Eurig was in Kolkata in October doing a very whirlwind residency, and which in the space of about 5.5 days we tried to do all of Kolkata. So you can imagine how challenging that was. Chose certain specific key sites which I thought would unlock certain important complexes about not just the presence of empire, but also what it means to be in Kolkata as a Bengali. And what we ended up doing, and this is probably the structuring principle in our book, is that we've shared experiences in 3 cities. One is Mumbai, which is where I live. One is Aberystwyth, which is where Eurig lives, and Kolkata, where neither of us live. But to which now we have this sort of connection that has, for me, it's a long age-old connection. For you, it's a new one. So what we thought is, since we are in Kolkata, we'll read maybe just 2 of the Kolkata poems. Does that sound okay? Rather than reading some of the older work. Because this came out of this very recent interaction with Kolkata. Do you want to go first with one of your poems, and then I'll...
So, Sampurna mentioned the presence of empire in Calcutta. Well, one of the places she took me was South Park Street Cemetery. I'm sure you know it well. To show me specifically the tomb of William Jones, which was genuinely very, very interesting. But the whole place, the whole experience was just amazing. These tombs are just, they're just spectacular. And the fact that they're so overgrown as well, that came together in this poem. The graves at South Park Street. Life comes at you fast in a cemetery. This one rocks under leafage. Its tombs like weightlifters, dripping wet, stiffened upper lips, arms trembling. In the creeper's grip, great pillars split like apples, cleaved fissures and ruptured arches breached by a burst of leaves. Some vaults are more firm than others. This one seems consigned to its fate. One C. Green, Major General on the staff and Commander of Artillery, ever zealous in the discharge of its duties and fulfilling them with fidelity and integrity to the state. Endangered by tree roots.
Eurig wrote 7 poems about 7 key locations. I wrote one long poem called City in 7 Dislocations. And I'm going to read you part 5, which deals with Park Street Cemetery. That day we began our tour at Neemtola Crematorium, and we ended at Park Street Cemetery. That will explain the first line of this poem. If the theme was death, what then was I? Avenging angel in a secret garden, macabre tour guide, or more simply, conduit, receiver of impressions that I would transmit, transcribe, record your baritone, bringing Rose Aylmer's epitaph to life in the cemetery where birdsong blossomed on trees and the muezzin called in a joyous ceremony of sound. What was her fate, you laugh, in this inclement climb of human life? Clearly, death. Untimely, uncomely, and all the tombs of forgotten city within a city haunted still by the ghosts of glories past, softly shooing barefoot boys away, extricating splinters of pride from a flesh long gone to rot. And the poets' graves, one seen, one not, what meaning could they have for you? And why insist they meant something to me, when all I felt was enormous yawning gap between forerunners and I, inheritor of more than one tradition, free of both, deranged survivor, uncertain of centuries, running from one to another with you? In the cemetery I did not take you to. He lies beside his French wife, beneath his Bengali epitaph. There must be some lesson there for me, if only I knew which language it was being taught in. The core of cause, the core of kolo, the law of loss. In the cemetery you did not see a woman fed a pack of dogs fresh mutton from the butcher. The crows rejoiced. Flat, lived in and open, it seems now like the contrapuntal truth to the one we both walked through in tropical heat, peaked, mossed over, amassed, and unspoken. So we'll read another one from the set again, the Kolkata set. Those of you who are locals would have recognized that the other cemetery in the poem was Lower Circular Road Cemetery. The 2 poets were Derozio and Michael Madhusudhan Dotto. All of it very kindly explained in the appendices, because this book will also travel to Wales, where I will not be to explain things. Okay, the next one is about Kali. It has a reference to the Kali temple. You want to go first? Okay, so Kali Temple Road. To write of love as if it were the city I lived in would be the kind of lie that passes for truth. So easily, it slips down the throat like a teacher's whiskey after a week of unlearning old aggravations. I never loved this city. But it's not the city I write about. It's love. It's the as if it were I write about, as if it were a dissimulation worth all the effort in the world. As long as I never ran out of pavements to walk on, past all the emergency exits masquerading as alleyways when the walls would come together and you join the multitudes of men. There were armed guards at the entrance, gold loans behind the doors. We were encashing every moment due to us with credit, all the unspent seconds which we now wish to squander here on the road named after the temple I would never take you to, because I am unnerved by temples, uneasy in temples, my body unaware of the stance that should be taken in temples, refusing to be taken in where the devotees hustle. So the temple road will never be for me. The temple, the goat being killed, the praying, the pushing, the guide to the sanctum, who will then take $1,000 in return for your sacred moment with her who gave this city its name, maybe, and not a humble grass cutter, and be instead the road of the heist, the getaway car, the logic of bank robbers, so suddenly sound as we exit that armored place with no security, but our bland expressions and shaded eyes easing into the world as if penniless again. No one would dare to rob me. Not even you, conspicuous chameleon in your gamcha from Dhaka, as we failed to find the cafe in the middle of the road and resorted to open air as our only disguise. You could have been knifed on Kali Temple Road. Instead, you came back, relieved and laughing, and I liquid with laughter too, for you had joined the multitude of men, and I was no better than a sly abettor in your urgent crime. Road then of transgression, sanguinary road, road of guava mouth and onion skin, water, body, and stone. There must have been flowers, but I didn't see them. I saw flesh too close to metal, miraculously coexistent, unharmed, but merely by a whisker.
So this was from this book called Elsewhere, Where Else. Will you read one more, Eurig? And then we'll hear from Subhro and Nicky.
Well, Sampurna mentioned armed guards at the entrance in that poem. And this was, it became a bit of a theme for us on our visit, being stopped at checkpoints and told to wait in doorways and so on. So this continued right up to my departure from Kolkata at the airport, where I was asked to go into a separate room. I wasn't frisked, but what I describe in this poem, it's a true story. So, business visa. It was your fault. I answered yes to the hapless guard at the passport desk, followed by a sudden, unprovoked, I'm a poet. And even a second and third time, as the poor man paused and frowned and grasped at the words, and those passengers passed who'd been way back behind in the queue. So he asked me again, Sir, have you been here in Kolkata on business? And I then held my tongue and gladly replied that I had not, no. But, sir, you do have a business visa. So I blame you, who picked our way forever in and out of rooms where men begin by asking for some form of proof, who rambled past old fools aloof, skewered that guard on Kamak Street, who was so bold and dumb as to treat the two of us like mules. He knew, by the time we both were ushered through, what a poet was. Or those office clerks on Kali Temple Road who lowly lurked in the land of checks and currencies, who never knew, and watched us leave with loot to line our pockets. Yes, it's you I blamed at the passport desk as I was summoned out of line to a room and asked for the fourth or fifth time why I was a poet who had to his name a business visa. And then a man came to apologize for this minor mistake and doggedly, warily waved me away.
This requires a very short footnote, and I suppose the footnote somehow relates to this concept of creative industries that we use a lot, the expression is used a lot these days. Essentially, when you travel as a creative person to India, you're not going as an academic for a conference. You may be spending some time. You are actually on business. So what we need to get for these poets coming here is a business visa. And it may raise some questions and eyebrows. So, now we'll hear from Aerial Roots, a book by Subhro and Nicky.
আমি বাংলায় পড়ি, কারণ এটাই যেখানে যেখানে কবিতা পড়ার ডাক আসে ইদানিং তার মধ্যে একমাত্র এখানেই আমি বাংলায় পড়তে পারি। আমি শুরু করি ওই কবিতাটা থেকে যেটার কথা একটু আগে বলছিলাম, যে ওয়েলিংটন স্কোয়ার কলকাতা। এই কবিতাটার আসল নাম স্বাধীনতা সমূহ, এর একটা অংশের নাম ওয়েলিংটন স্কোয়ার। সারা ইন্টারনেট তন্ন তন্ন করেও কেউ নামের ইতিহাস বলতে পারল না, শুধু টান টান হয়ে উঠল 18 শতক শেষের ধর্মতলা। জেনারেল ওয়েলসলি দীর্ঘ মারাঠা যুদ্ধের শেষে গরমে নাজেহাল ইংল্যান্ডে ফেরায় মগ্ন। পেশাদার সৈন্যের সামনে শত্রু কি আমার কাজের মতো? ক্লান্তি আসে, বিশেষ করে সে কাজ যখন কোনো কোম্পানির। আমার ফেরার ট্যাক্সি পার্ক স্ট্রিট ছুঁয়ে যায়, বেরিল গ্রাউন্ড রোড। বন্ধুকে ঔপনিবেশিক কলকাতা দেখানোর মধ্যে দিয়ে নিয়ে এসেছি কবরখানায়, সম্ভবত ম্যালেরিয়ায় মৃত সদ্য যুবক ইংরেজের এপিটাফ। কোম্পানি পেইন্টিংয়ের উজ্জ্বল রঙের ছায়ায় স্পষ্ট হাঁটু অবধি বুট পরা সাহেবরা কাদায় নাজেহাল পাথর বসানো তদারকে। স্বাধীনতা কি আসলে নিজের মতো কোনো জায়গার কাদার গন্ধ? এই লেখাটার নাম নিকির সঙ্গে যে কথা হতে পারত প্রমেনাডে। চোখ আসলে তেমন কোনো গুহা নয়, মৃত ইতিহাসে কাঁটা হয়ে থাকা সকালের মুখ তো পরিষ্কার করা যায় যেমনটা বা এই তীব্র হাওয়ায়। আমি ভাবতে থাকি কিভাবে কত লোক ভারতে আসে আনন্দের দেশ হিসেবে, অথচ লোকে কেন ভরা সংসার ছেড়ে সন্ন্যাসী হয় বোঝানো যায় না। আমি তর্ক করে বলি, যৌনপ্রান্তিক মানুষেরাও ঘর ছাড়ে শুধুমাত্র প্রচলিত আনন্দের চাপে। বসেছি সমুদ্রের পাশে, পাথর ও সৈকতের মধ্যে যে বোঝাপড়া, তার সংকেত নিয়ে সামনে তোদের প্রাচীন দুর্গ, ডান দিকে মাথা তুললে পেন্টিনাস মিনার। তখনও তোদের দেশে ইংরেজি জাঁকিয়ে বসেনি। নতুন শব্দ মানে নতুন জানা, তার সামনে ভাষার শরীর কেমন লাগে শুরুতে? পাথরের টুকরোয় থাকা ছিদ্রের উপরে যেভাবে বাড়ে বৃষ্টির ফাটল। আমি কিছুতেই মনে করতে পারছি না ইংরেজ আসার আগে গেলাসকে বাংলায় কি বলা হতো।
I'll start with a poem written after we went to Bristol. When Subhro came to stay, we took a road trip. We went to Bristol and we found Raj Ram Mohan Roy's tomb. Preliminary poem. Once I lived in an ancient world with a crimson ball that hung above the harbour, and the centre of the world sat framed on tenured desks, and the only monks on fire was a drunk man in a privet hedge. To dress as a pirate in the Commonwealth Museum was of no consequence, or to lounge in the road for the children of Iraq was of no consequence. Strange the mind devoid of both bird and flying insect. And the great boat slid heavily from its harbour, like a stomach lacking the ability to perform the process of digestion. O suspension over muddy entrails. O everlasting partition. How my whalebone skirt has saved me like a parachute. And this next one, I forgot to say, I came and stayed in Delhi as part of the exchange for 10 days, so I got to experience that. And this poem was written in my hotel room there. East India Company. Is this what it is to move elegantly through the world? Fat horse with its ankles swollen in a field of mud. Thin horse twists its felted neck and bucks in the dust. I move around the room like a captain. I salute the friendly fan above my bed. Each morning, woman crouches wide to sweep the floor with a horse's tail. She considers deleting the earlier poetry. Each morning, I rinse out my smalls to hang above the sink, peel a persimmon and a packet of Emirates crackers. I wash the knife in the stainless steel sink. I wait like a captain at the desk. Later, we will have a discourse on colonialism. It is very simple. The wet horse lifts its tail, emits a gas. The woman sweeps an arc around herself. Temple. Tennis ball hit me on the head, and all the faculties did collapse. Boys playing cricket in a side street, bat boy angled to crack like a backwards cricket. Heads angled to see whether to laugh or not. Suddenly the whole of a tiny empire depending on the face not crumbling. Tennis ball matted in the palm. Bad offering rolled to a stop in the blurred dirt. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Boys in the temple, boys climbing the walls, boys playing cricket in the temple, naughty boys with arms and legs too long for them. Goofy boys with teeth flinging cow dung at the clean temple, running back to mothers through the neem trees, feather trees, the pale dust. Was it better back then? I see your raised hand, bespectacled. You sit behind a classroom desk. Captain-like. Boys, it was a mere tap.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our allocated time, and I think really more time should be allocated to reading of poetry rather than talking about it in festivals. We have time for one or maybe two short questions, or rather questions that require a short answer. Does anybody have a pressing question? Yes? Roving mic?
Warrior word. Now, Shubhajit and independent. Okay. I know it's very difficult when you are going forward between scripts and other languages. Now, what really urges you to move on, to touch the heart of a person who speaks a different language? Is it passion in you, or is it the challenges that you face to touch somebody else's heart in a different language? Any of you can take this question.
Perhaps that was very well put. Thank you so much for putting it in just that manner. Possibly the idea to unlock this mystery, for me that's what it was. Here is a mystery. How can I unlock this enigma? And how does one stay invested? Perhaps it differs from person to person, but I personally like a challenge. So if it's very difficult, I want to do it. That's my cussid side. So yes, a certain desire to prove that I can, and second, simply this urge to be allowed in through a door that was locked.
Well, first, translating poetry for me is like when I read some good poem in some other language, I sometimes think of Bengali poetry readers, and I suggest someone else to translate if I don't get the time, or I translate. Yes, essentially, it's to take poetry poetry from other language to my own language. In my case, my target language is always Bangla, so it's not a foreign language for me.
I don't think everybody has to answer this question unless you... yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me? Talking of challenges, my question can be addressed to all of you, and any of you can take it. So I find translation from a language to another language, however well versed one may be with all the languages, always poses a bit of a challenge in finding like the right word for that particular emotion. So if you're mentioning like the word baritone, like, do you think we have like a right emotion in the word with your language in Welsh or Bengali? Because there are so many words which just speak for themselves, in their particular language. And if they are translated, do you think they lose some of their luster on the way?
Yeah. Yes, certainly. They will, obviously, because it's in another language, so it will definitely be different in many, many ways, I'm sure. But as a translator, I think what I try to do is to, well, what I have to do is interpret the original in my own way, and then find whatever that is, in essence, or feeling, or whatever, and try and recreate it in some way in another language. So obviously somebody else may well disagree with me, but that's it. That's how it is. And creating a new translation, I think, is just like creating a new poem, brand new poem, more or less. Just as if you were starting from scratch. The only difference is that you have a blueprint for it already. So yeah, that's it.
I can add to that by saying, no matter what the challenge, and I think that's really what keeps me going, there is a solution. It has to be inventive. Without inventiveness, the best translation will be a dead translation. So for me, play, inventiveness, trusting my instinct, trusting what the impulse of the original was, and running with it into a free field that I create within that blueprint he talked about. Play, inventiveness, trust, instinct. This is what I go with. And
so being in the creative forum, I assume that all of you all give yourself the liberty to meander out a little as well, to find the right emotion when you are doing the translation. Because it cannot be a blueprint to a blueprint, right? So do you give each other that kind of space and that kind of inroad?
I think what I found was different situations call for a different type of translation, perhaps, and maybe when you feel more of a responsibility to getting that literal, the literal meaning, and more of a direct translation is a different situation to feeling like you have less of a responsibility and you can perhaps play with it a bit more.
Add to that quickly, because I translated Subhro's Bangla poems into English. He did a first version because despite all his disclaimers, he's very good in both the languages. So he provided a first version, and then I worked on it as a person who writes poetry in English. I remember we had this, when you work with a poet who's also a friend, they allow you to take liberties that maybe somebody else might not. So sometimes I would say, may I do this? And he would say, certainly, because it's sounding all right. And then we had an argument about ashte and whether it should be squamous, which felt like a very highbrow word compared to ashte, which is a very colloquial common word. And he agreed to my solution for that. So it's a lot of give and take, no?
Yes, of course.
Especially because Bengali, I think, is a very soft language. I mean, I personally find it like very courteous, you know, even if you're like shouting or like, you know, scolding somebody. You know, it's like, it's always got that little mishti or that sweetness to it, which I'm surprised sometimes is not there in English, you know, which can become very ruthless if you look at the vocab which we do it. So that was just a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this question, which could easily usher us into another long discussion about translating poetry, but we have to stop here. I'm sorry we have run over a little bit. And I would like to thank the poets. I would like to thank the festival for inviting us, and I would like to thank Wales Arts International and British Council Wales for supporting this wonderful project. And Poetry Wala for these beautiful books. And please a round of applause for the poets. Thank you.